Gemar Chatima Tova, Shana Tova. It's so good to see all the faces gathered here in this space and to feel the presence of so many who are joining us from afar. I am very happy to report that there were some very high-level negotiations that took place in the Solomon household this year. Some big compromises were made having to do with dishwasher duty and taking out the trash. But I'm delighted to report that Rabbi Eric and I struck a deal, and I am giving the Kol Nidre sermon. In all seriousness, Rabbi Eric has been nudging me to do this for years, and I'm just incredibly grateful for his patience and your patience, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to stand before you as your rabbi and offer these words tonight. So 11 years ago, I woke up after coming home from the hospital. I had just had my third D&E. For those of you who don't know, a D&E stands for dilation and extraction, and it's the procedure that one has after the end of a pregnancy that has ended in miscarriage. And so we had 3 second trimester miscarriages. Many of you who have been in this congregation for years were along with us on that incredibly difficult journey. And some of you may not know. That's okay too. But after that third miscarriage, we woke up just in the throes of grief and despair. And my parents, in their loving, compassionate, merciful way, scooped the 4 of us, we were a family of 4 at that time, into the minivan and drove us to a beach. And I do not remember what beach, but they knew that we needed a place to heal, to get away for a couple of days. And what I do remember is stepping into the ocean, my chest heaving, my tears mingling with the salt water of the ocean, and that feeling with each wave washing over me, a little part of me that almost wished that the wave would wash me away entirely. Maybe you have had that kind of sorrow, perhaps not a miscarriage, but something else that ripped your heart out of your chest, that broke you open. And my experience is that in moments of such sorrow and grief, it feels incredibly overwhelming, like things could never feel any different. But over time, that sadness softens, and it may never go away, but somehow it changes, it transforms in such a way that we can go on living. And then the question becomes, what did I learn from that experience? What do I want to take with me from that experience? What story do I want to tell? And so tonight I want to tell you one of the stories that I take from my own experience. And here's the story in a nutshell. We can hold grief in one hand and hope in the other. My experience with pregnancy loss was my own deepest encounter with what it means to watch hope die. Miscarriage, of course, like other kinds of losses, can be experienced as a whole set of loss. But above all, it's the loss of hope of bringing a child into the world. And I was thinking about this really in light of the pandemic, which has brought some of that experience of dashed hopes to bear for me once again. And as your rabbi, I've watched so many of you that over this past 18 months, weddings canceled, weddings postponed, celebrations that weren't quite as celebratory, funerals where only immediate family could gather, trips not taken, the list goes on and on. And here we are, 18 months into this experience, and it's easy to feel really despairing. And yet, Here we are on Yom Kippur. And though this sanctuary is partially full, I literally feel this space vibrating with our prayers of hope for the year to come. And so what I want to say is that it's okay to hope. It's actually more than okay to hope. It's human, and it's really Jewish. After all, the national anthem of the state of Israel is Hatikva, the hope. It's really part of our spiritual DNA. But if we've learned nothing else this past year, so many things are out of our control. So how do we keep hoping when we've seen so many of our hopes vanquished? How do we live with grief in one hand and hope in the other? Here's my response. We hold hope loosely. We hold it loosely. So what do I mean? Hope is how we want the world to be, how we wish the world to be. Life will be amazing when I meet that person, when I accomplish that thing, when I have that experience, when I reach that goal. The problem is that when we get attached to a particular outcome, we clench hope. We clench it. When we hold hope loosely, we remember that what is happening in front of us is not the end of the story. It's just what's happening right now. And this leads to a different kind of hope, one that resides not in a specific outcome, but in our capacity to be with things as they are. So what does holding hope loosely look like in practice? I want to share with you 3 ways that I practice holding hope loosely in my own life. The first is remembering my resilience. I find hope in remembering that over the course of my life, and even over the course of this past year, things were trying, really trying. And yet I noticed that I'm strong, and that there's actually a lot inside of me that responds well to adversity. And this confidence, which was hard-won, brings me hope. So when hope arises in my own heart for any number of things, I practice remembering that no matter how things turn out, I have a long history of rising above challenges and of meeting the moment with some strength and grace. Holding hope loosely in this way means that I hold my hopes alongside an awareness of my own resilience, even in the face of disappointment and loss. As one of my running coaches often reminds me, you have survived 100% of your hardest days. And let me be clear, this is not just something that I can say. Being human is hard, and every single one of you can say exactly the same thing. If you're still putting one foot in front of the other, you are resilient. So first is that we're resilient. The second thing I do to practice holding hope loosely is doing things, actual activities that nurture my own sense of hope. Ordinary activities like going for a walk or a run or yoga or giving tzedakah or lighting Shabbat candles or getting really present with someone. Those activities bring me further from my own sense of despair and fear. And when I remember to do those things, I don't always remember, but when I remember to do those things rather than get lost in my worries, I actually nurture hope, even as I release my attachment to the outcome. I feel connected to my hopes, but not completely fixated on what's going to happen. It's like I can hold my hopes in a larger frame of the blessings which are already here and now. So the first is remembering that we're resilient, and the second is doing things, activities that nurture our hope without being overly attached to whatever's going to happen. And finally, I practice holding hope loosely when I remember the distinction between what I can and cannot control. Confession, for all of you who know me, you already know this. I worry a lot. If worrying were a sport, I am convinced that I could compete at an Olympic level. The famous Jewish joke, start worrying, details to follow, that is the indigenous wisdom of my soul. But at the end of the day, no matter how much I worry, I know that I must let it go. The idea of surrendering what I cannot control speaks to this idea of holding hope loosely, because this kind of hope says, do your best. Live according to your highest values and intentions. Show up, do the work, even knowing that I may not succeed, and I may not be able to keep myself and those I love safe. Uncertainty, impermanence, and loss are part of the human experience. So we're resilient. We have things we can do that actually help us nurture hope. And we can practice remembering what we can and cannot control. For me, this is what it feels like to hold hope loosely. And loose hope is the kind of hope that made it possible for Natan, our last child, to enter the world. Without hope, I could not have endured that pregnancy. But it wasn't any old kind of hope that sustained me. It was loose hope. A hope that remembered how much I had been through and how strong I was. A hope that kept me walking and moving and reaching out to friends and praying and doing whatever I could think of to keep those days and months moving by. And a hope that acknowledged that I had a responsibility to care for my pregnancy, but the rest I had to release. And so as we move through the next 24 hours together, I pray that all of us are inspired to express our own deepest hopes for our lives, for each other, and for the world that desperately needs our prayers. But let us hold those hopes loosely, knowing that we have the strength we need to meet adversity. We have things, each one of us, our own particular things, and Jewish things that we can do to help us keep hope alive. And in the end, there is great wisdom in hoping, even as we acknowledge that there is only so much we can control. We can hold grief in one hand and hope in the other. Psalm 27 is the psalm that we traditionally recite twice a day in the entire month leading up to Rosh Hashanah and through Yom Kippur. And the very last line of that psalm says, Kaveh el Hashem, chazak v'yametz libecha v'kaveh el Hashem. Hope, be strong, and move with a courageous heart. Hope. So friends, on this Yom Kippur, my hope is that our prayer and our time together that is really happening across time and space is a place that can contain all of our hopes and all of our dreams and our grief. And that together, with practice, with community, with intention, we can keep hope alive, but hold it very, very loosely. Wish everyone a meaningful practice over the next 24 hours and a Shana Tova, a good year ahead.